Hello, sisters. Lesbian Psychologies, Exploration Challenges, Part 3, Family, Essay number 10. Coming Out to Mom, Theoretical Aspects of the Mother-Daughter Process, by Sherry Zitter. There is something compelling for lesbians about the topic of coming out to mother. Whenever two or more lesbians congregate, sooner or later the conversation turns to coming out stories, and primary among them, is the question of whether one's mother, quote unquote, knows about one's lesbian orientation, and what her reaction was, is, or would be if she were to be told. Quote, "A son is yours till he finds a wife, but a daughter is yours for the rest of your life." End quote. This proverb succinctly describes what many mothers expect of their children. When a mother raises a son, she generally expects to lose him to another woman someday. When she raises a daughter, however, she usually anticipates that even if the daughter marries a man, mother will always be the most important woman in her daughter's life. This myth, which runs deep in our culture and our psyche, may be primary in a mother's reaction to her daughter's coming out. Coming out to one's mother is not just an event, but a process that happens over time and in different contexts. A mother's acceptance of her daughter's lesbianism to the point of being able to talk about it with her, but with others, is considered part of a coming out process as well. The experience of the mother-daughter relationship changes for each one as the process unfolds and is affected by where each is in her own process of coming out. It is worth exploring some of the factors that influence the responses of both mother and daughter, as well as ways to help them both survive and grow from the process of coming out. The issues raised here may be useful for a lesbian to consider in her decision about whether or not to tell her mother and the timing of the initial disclosure. The dynamics of a lesbian mother daughter relationship are not addressed, as they are assumed to be sufficiently distinct to exceed the scope of this discussion. As feminists, we have learned that focusing on only one aspect of reality gives a myopic view of the whole. Any event is experienced in at least three contexts: the internal, the interpersonal, and the societal. For lesbians and their mothers to understand and validate their experiences, each of these levels must be explored. Thus, the coming out process is examined here from intra-psychic, family systems, and sociocultural perspectives. These theoretical frameworks suggest some commonalities experienced by lesbian daughters and their mothers. However, such factors as ethnicity, age, religion, birth order, and being differently abled, such as deaf or blind, uniquely affect the coming out process and may create quite different experiences. Each lesbian situation is further affected by underlying societal norms and values that so often make coming out to one's mother stressful. It is this societal homophobia that weighs heavily in the decision of those lesbians who decide not to tell their mothers. A clear understanding of the dynamics underlying the coming out process is crucial to helping lesbians develop and maintain a positive sense of self in an often hostile environment. The relationship with one's mother can be seen as pragmatic to relationships with important others in one's life. The relationship with one's mother can be seen as paradigmatic to relationships with important others in one's life. Whether or not quote unquote mom knows, an understanding of how a lesbian relates to her mother may help her cope with the rest of the world in a more healing and empowering way. Intra-psychic considerations. The mother's response. Why is it that a mother's reaction to her daughter's lesbianism is so often negative? One factor might be the replacement of mother rather than father in what Nancy Chodorow called the quote, bisexual triangle, end quote. Neither heterosexual nor lesbian girls, quote unquote, replace their mothers with their fathers at 4 or 5 years old, as Freud theorized. Instead, they use the relationship with father to separate from mother, creating an ongoing triangle involving daughter, mother, and father. When a heterosexual daughter marries a husband, she is in effect replacing her father in this intrapsychic triangle. But what of the lesbian? In some profound way, she is replacing her mother in the triangle, and her mother may experience this as rejection. Her mother is not hers, quote, for the rest of her life, end quote, but is saying, quote, I no longer have a closer bond with you than with any other woman, end quote. A daughter's lesbianism can stir up unconscious wishes in mother that have been denied or repressed. Because almost everyone's primary caretaker is a woman, most females in our society are originally woman identified. As an infant, each of us experienced our original physical intimacy with a woman. Yet, we have internalized the societal myth that women cannot be sexually intimate with women. Hence, it could be surmised that a mother's primary attraction to her own mother had to be denied and deeply repressed in order for her to become exclusively heterosexual. It may produce anxiety in a mother for these early memories to be evoked. A daughter's choice of lesbianism may be experienced unconsciously by mother as a sexual intrusion. A mother might wonder, quote, if you're attracted to women, what do you feel towards me? And how do I feel about you? End quote. A mother feels a sense of differentness, or quote unquote, not me, in the presence of her male son, which creates a separateness not present with a daughter. A mother tends to experience a daughter as more like herself. Ego boundaries are more diffuse. Some mothers find nursing sexually arousing, an experience that could be scarier to feel toward a female than toward a male baby. Might such mothers experience conflict around nursing their daughters because of internalized homophobia? The more fluid ego boundaries between a mother and daughter can cause a mother with recent awareness of her daughter's lesbianism to feel confused and uneasy about her own sexual feelings, as well as what she might imagine her daughters to be. A daughter's lesbianism can make a mother unconsciously feel jealous. My daughter is nurturing another woman or women instead of me. Louise Eichenbaum and Susie Orbach, in their book Understanding Women, contend that a daughter's first child is her mother. When a woman has a male child, she experiences him as someone she should nurture, take care of, and teach to be independent. A mother teaches a female child that her task is to nurture others, which the daughter often learns by mothering her own mother. This can occur in a variety of ways, including quote unquote parentification, looking to one's own child to act as one's parent, conforming to the quote unquote good little girl image expected of her, and suppressing any anger toward her mother. Embedded deeply in our psyche is the expectation that it is natural for one's daughter to nurture a man more than she does her mother. If she nurtures another woman in the same way, however, many hostilities or longings can be aroused in her mother. Compounding this loss of nurturance may be a mother's unconscious resentment in her own relationship of what Chodrow terms quote unquote heterosexual asymmetry. Because women's nurturing capacities are encouraged in our society, while men's are systematically repressed, there is usually an asymmetry in their abilities to meet each other's needs. Women cannot expect their emotional needs to be met in a heterosexual relationship as well as men can. Most mothers, consciously or unconsciously, teach their daughters not to expect men to meet their needs. Thus, a mother who realizes that her daughter is having a relationship with women, who generally have the potential to meet emotional needs better than men, may at some level feel jealous or resentful, as this is something that she never had herself. Despite the strong negative reactions of a mother usually feels at the point of disclosure, there is potential for her to have many positive feelings throughout the negotiating process that follows. This is not to underestimate the overwhelmingly negative response that follows disclosure of lesbianism to a mother. It is rather to highlight how often initial responses are taken as the only feeling a mother has, now and forever. As a mother is approached over time by a loving daughter who respects her need to struggle with the concept of lesbianism, it may be helpful to keep the more positive aspects of their relationship in mind. Some of these positive feelings can more easily respond to the positive aspects of bonding between the women without being forced to deal with her daughter's sexuality. At an altruistic level, a mother may feel happy that her daughter has a greater potential to have more emotional needs met than would be possible with a man. Many mothers have been socialized to sacrifice for their children's happiness. They also, at one level, want their daughters to get more than they themselves could get as women. This side of the ambivalence often takes a while to surface and is one of the reasons why it is important to view coming out as a process for both mother and daughter. There are other positive intrapsychic reactions a mother may have towards her daughter's lesbianism. When a daughter chooses women as her primary love objects, she is affirming her mother as valid and important. Society sees women as unimportant, and a lesbian daughter is affirming the introjected mother within herself and saying, quote unquote, you have value. Women have been taught to repress their anger, especially their anger toward men. When a lesbian comes out to her mother, this can affirm mothers' repressed anger towards men, which is partly anger at the lack of options afforded to women. Through stating by example another way of life, an option that mother never saw as viable or even existent. Thus, mother's reaction to daughter's lesbianism may be ambivalent. She may simultaneously feel rejected or abandoned, and yet may feel somehow validated by her daughter's choice of women. Intrapsychic considerations. The daughter's response. A lesbian daughter can have both positive and negative reactions to her own coming out to her mother. Some of her fears or guilt can be part of her own internalized homophobia. This often surfaces as self hatred, either for her lesbianism or displaced onto any number of other issues. Part of a daughter's reaction may be related to the issues to which her mother might react. A daughter could feel unconscious guilt at abandoning her mother by replacing her in the bisexual triangle, at escaping her mother's fate of heterosexual asymmetry, at failing to live out a basic dream of her mother's, for daughter to be heterosexual like her, and at taking care of another woman better than she is nurturing her own mother. In addition, knowing that one's mother feels bad or guilty about one's lesbianism is not easy to ignore. A daughter is often unconsciously looking for support or validation from her mother, and a mother's negative reaction may arouse anger, disappointment, shame, or resentment. This can create a cycle in which mother and daughter are hurt and angered by the insensitivity and lack of understanding that the other has shown toward her feelings. On the positive side, a lesbian daughter can feel that she is validating womanhood, rejecting the message that dad is better than mom, and escaping from the double bind in which society, via her mother, has put her. Mother has subtly passed on an underlying societal message, quote, get your needs met the way I did, be heterosexual, but don't expect men to meet your needs. Your needs can only be met well by women, end quote. A woman can resolve this double bind in a healthy way by becoming a lesbian and finding a greater potential to have her needs met, both on a sexual and an affectional level. She may get, rather than heterosexual asymmetry, a reciprocal nurturance that leads to a greater self validation and self worth. Furthermore, the simple act of being honest with one's mother about one's own identity, of refusing to live a lie, increases self esteem. This does not imply that coming out to one's mother is the appropriate choice for all lesbians. A woman who feels greater self worth is in a better position to help her mother feel more validated as well. A major theme in coming out to one's mother is the sense of repeating, at a new developmental level, earlier experiences of separation from mother. Every female has had the experience of asserting her autonomy in a society where boys are autonomous and girls are dependent, of forming her identity in a culture where the identity of woman is seen as adjunct to that of a man. As a toddler and again as an adolescent, her developmental progression away from her mother often may have been met by rejection or withdrawal in a subtle form. Coming out may be experienced as reminiscent of these earlier rejections and increasing separations from mother. This process may have been positive, may have both positive and negative components. The pain of rejection may be accompanied by a freeing feeling of greater independence, of having more room to grow as a person separated from one's mother and her wishes and demands. Viewing coming out as a process helps us to remember that a different kind of mother daughter relationship can be negotiated using the perspective and healing power of time. My bad. Family systems perspective. Family systems theory examines patterns of interaction among members of a family without assigning linear cause or effect to the observed behavior. Family dynamics can be dramatically altered during the process of coming out. Coalitions in the family can change when a daughter comes out to her mother. There are often reverberations throughout the family system, regardless of whether the others in the family are aware of the lesbianism. Coalitions may either be rigidified in their former positions or undergo abrupt rearrangements. The existence of a quote unquote family secret, if the mother cannot share it with her husband, may create tension in the parental subsystem. If daughter and mother, or daughter and father, have had a coalition that excluded the other parent, mother and father may become stronger allies to tell the lesbian that there is something quote unquote wrong with her. Alternatively, a split may develop between parents if one accepts the lesbianism with more ease than the other. In a single parent family in particular, other family members or friends may become triangulated into a tense relationship between mother and daughter. In many families, a degree of scapegoating occurs. Depending on where she is in the family system, a woman's coming out can either reinforce her role as the scapegoat or can shift this role from another sibling to the lesbian. If she was already in a scapegoat role, then mother and father can see her lesbianism as just another example that she is a quote unquote bad daughter. If the lesbian has previously been the quote unquote good daughter and another child in the family has been designated as the bad child, there may be a shift in roles. The former scapegoat's relationship with mother may suddenly improve, while the lesbian mother interactions become fraught with increased tension. Families often have a historical pattern of unique expectations for the oldest or youngest daughters in each generation, and a deviation of this pattern may cause sudden scapegoating or a great pressure on the lesbian to conform to what the family expects. In a family where a father has had an over close relationship with his daughter, a mother may view her daughter as a rival. Coming out as a lesbian in such a family may actually engender a sense of relief in the lesbian's mother, who might see her daughter as less threatening to her own marital relationship. This perspective could help her deal better with her daughter's lesbianism. Father, however, may feel quite rejected by his daughter's choice of women as sexual partners. Possibly his own repressed incest fantasies must be given up, as well as feeling a fantasized sexual rejection. This may be a factor in a family where a mother has accepted the lesbianism much more easily than a father. In view of high incest statistics, we must confront the reality that in many families, a father has had an actual incestuous relationship with his daughter. His his reaction to her coming out could then involve anger at her rejection of sexual involvement with him, as well as some guilt at quote unquote causing her lesbianism. Salvador Minuchin's conceptualization of a continuum of possible boundaries among people is helpful in viewing structural changes in a family. This systemic concept of boundaries, which describes the relationship between two people, is distinct from the intra-psychic meaning, which indicates the parameters of the self. That happens to one person feels to another as if it happened to her. From a system perspective, these two would be enmeshed. This extreme might be characterized from an intra-psychic viewpoint as fusion or symbiosis. On the other extreme, a very rigid boundary exists where one person in a family underreacts to major events that happen to another. Along the continuum are many gradations of relationships which are considered functional or non functional to varying degrees. This depends on many factors, including how many people experience their relationships, their ethnicity and cultural expectations, and whether the type of boundary interferes with daily functioning. The boundary between a woman and her mother tends to be more diffuse than between a mother and her son. Coming out as a lesbian is one way of defining a clear boundary with one's mother. A woman who tells her mother, quote unquote, I am a lesbian, is defining herself as different from her mother. A mother can feel both abandoned and betrayed by not feeling this special relationship anymore. She is giving up the heterosexual daughter she dreamed of and accepting a daughter who is a lesbian. A time consuming process at best. Among what may be given up dreams of her daughter's marriage, children, her own grandchildren, and easy acceptance into an extended family and society. By juxtaposing the intrapsychic and systems perspectives, we can see that this major structural change in a family could precipitate a grieving process in a mother similar to the mourning of someone who has died. Some of the typical stages of mourning are usually experienced denial, guilt, anger, and depression. Mourning a death is a vitally important process for the survivor in order to resolve the grief sufficiently to continue living and growing. However, the type of mourning that involves struggling to accept a fact of life rather than a fact of death has the potential for an even more positive outcome. If this mourning process is allowed to take place, a mother may eventually be able to accept a daughter as a lesbian, opening the way for mother and daughter to establish a different kind of relationship. For the mothers of most lesbians, this major mourning process happens for the first time when their daughters come out. For differently abled women, however, this happens for a second time. A mother has already gone through, or more likely is still stuck in, a process of grieving the lack of a quote unquote normal, non disabled child, and now feels a greater gulf and possibility of societal ostracism and pity. The duration of the mourning process can vary widely. This new separation, this giving up of a former unique relationship, has to be mourned by both mother and daughter. The daughter may also have to mourn the loss of a fantasized mother who could immediately and effortlessly accept her as a lesbian. Sociocultural factors. We have internalized cultural and societal norms at a subtle yet profound level of our beings. The more that a lesbian can understand the impact of society and culture on her own and her mother's feelings about lesbianism, the more informed will be her decision, and, if she chooses to tell her mother, the easier will be the coming out process for both of them. From the perspective of social role theory, part of her mother's role is to teach her daughter how to be a woman. In our society, part of being female is to be heterosexual. Most mothers experience their role in raising their daughters as including the teaching of proper sexual orientation. A mother often feels that her daughter's lesbianism represents the mother's failure to teach her role of womanhood. Quote, "Where did I go wrong?" End quote. A response so common as to be a stereotype encompasses varied reactions of guilt, shame, embarrassment, and a sense of failure. Clearly, one of the social stressors of being a lesbian is the feeling of hurting one's mother by forcing her to contend with the societal stigma of being a quote unquote bad mother. Overall, family styles can be challenged as a result of the coming out process. If the family pattern in the past has been openness, this pattern can be severely strained by the knowledge of a daughter's lesbianism. For example, a mother who has always taught her daughter to be proud of saying she is Jewish, even in the situations where people dislike Jews, it is suddenly faced with a dilemma. She may not want to tell anybody about her daughter's lesbianism. She may think, quote, "I've always been honest and told my daughter not to be ashamed of who she is, and now I don't want people to know about her." End quote. It may be quite difficult for a mother to reconcile this contradiction. Sociologically, lesbians are in the unusual position of belonging to a culture to which their parents do not belong and indeed find repugnant. Most cultural minorities have a natural socialization network from birth. They learn about coping styles and support networks, primarily unconsciously, from their parents. Lesbians, however, grow up without the role modeling and mentoring that most people take for granted. For a mother to discover or to become consciously aware that her daughter belongs to a different culture evokes a powerful, quote unquote, not me response that can cause her to react as if her daughter were practically a Martian. The implications of this cultural isolation for deaf lesbians, over 90% of whom have two hearing parents, are profound. There is a double cultural barrier between the deaf lesbian and her family. The capitalized deaf is typically used to denote a person identified with deaf culture, as opposed to someone who is simply audiologically deaf. A deaf lesbian has been socialized by her parents in neither the deaf nor the lesbian culture, and each of these communities has misconceptions and stereotypes about the other. Unable to find complete understanding in either culture, her relationship with her mother can take on greater importance, even as the barriers to parental acceptance loom larger. For a woman of color, a negative response from mother can be particularly poignant. People in minority groups are already oppressed by the outside world. A straight woman of color usually has been able to find support and acceptance within her own family and ethnic group, and has felt a double bond with her mother of being a minority woman. A lesbian of color, even when she does not disclose her identity to anyone in her culture, often grows up feeling she does not fit in, that she is unacceptable to the values of her culture. If she goes out, if she comes out, she risks bringing into the open a dual quote unquote not me response from her mother. Quote, "You're not heterosexual like me. You're something that my whole culture rejects." End quote. The minority lesbian may feel even more oppressed within her own family and her own culture, in addition to her constant oppression from the majority culture. A mother of color may not only reject her daughter's sexual preference, but may fear for her daughter's double oppression of ethnicity and sexual orientation. Olivia Espine has discussed, pages 35 to 55, how Latina lesbians must embrace three stigmatized identities: women, lesbian, and ethnic minority. Within the Latina's own culture, lesbianism is strongly stigmatized. She must deal with the reaction that she has quote unquote betrayed her own people by publicizing an identity that Latins believe to bring shame on them and reflect badly on their culture. In Latin culture, where family ties are vitally important, overt rejection is rare, but so is acknowledgement of lesbianism. A Latin lesbian, Lat- Espine points out, often must choose between leading a double life within her culture or closing off the possibility of serving the Latin community. Other minority lesbians, however, have reported that their mothers have had an easier time accepting their lesbianism than they had expected. The mother of a minority lesbian may accept her daughter's coming out more easily than a non minority mother because of her familiarity with oppression and being an outsider. Her own stigmatization may allow her greater empathy with a daughter who encounters stigma within their shared culture. Adrienne Rich has said, quote, lesbian existence is both the breaking of a taboo and the rejection of a compulsory way of life. End quote. Mothers are taught to raise their daughters to be like themselves, and one of the most profound pressures is to be heterosexual, just like mother. Societally, lesbianism is the ultimate rejection of the prescribed female role and the ultimate independence from a man. Whenever a taboo is broken, there is a degree to which the negative societal reaction is internalized, by mother as well as by daughter. There is often a sense of condemnation from society, not only of the lesbian, but also of her family. If a woman is a lesbian, her family, in particular her mother, must have done something wrong. Societal homophobia is internalized by both mother and daughter to create shame and guilt at the lesbian outcome. In some African tribes, coming out meant literally coming out from small huts where young girls had to undergo ritual confinement until the age they were ready to be married. Some lesbians, as well, for some lesbians as well, coming out feels like emerging from a type of confinement. However, mothers are rarely as enthusiastic as those of the African women who come out to be married. Lesbians, by their existence, are challenging societal notions of men as more valuable than women. Lesbian couples provide each other with symmetrical validation by each choosing a woman as her valued partner. The cultural dichotomy of the virgin and the whore, clearly warns us that the consequences of women being sexual are societal ostracism and rejection. We learn as women that our sexuality should be hidden, that it is dangerous and shameful. By becoming a lesbian, a woman does the opposite of hiding her sexuality. She reveals it. There is an apt parallel from deaf culture. 20 years ago, most deaf people were taught only to read lips and speak, never to use sign language. Signing would show that they were different. Now, there are interpreters at conferences and people signing in public, which proclaims the deafness and in some sense says, quote, I'm not ashamed to be deaf. In fact, I am proud of it, though society may think something is wrong with me, end quote. A lesbian, by the mere fact of identifying herself as such, proclaims her sexuality in a similar way. Most of our mothers raised Most of our mothers, raised in a sexually repressed and erotophobic culture, are uncomfortable with any display of sexuality, particularly from women, and most especially a societally unacceptable type of sexuality from their own daughters. Many lesbians would prefer not to proclaim their sexuality by the mere fact of identifying their lesbianism. However, society's tendency is to react to lesbianism as a sexual behavior rather than a sociocultural identity. This reaction is both a cause and a result of the erotophobia in our society and the difficulty in seeing women identified women in a sexist society as anything but a sexual aberration. Lesbians, as well as other stigmatized people, contend with the issue of identity spread. One's identity is seen in unidimensional terms. In the eyes of society, a lesbian is only a sexual and perverted being. A deaf person is only a quote unquote deaf and dumb person who can't communicate. The cultural benefits in both cultures are neither known or supported. Most mothers, like many others in the majority culture, don't get don't have a clear idea of what lesbianism is are full of some frightening misconceptions. They may think that a lesbian wants to be a man or has a confused gender identity. Some mothers may think that they themselves don't know any other lesbians, and this serves to perpetuate their fears and myths. A mother may think that lesbians are child molesters, that they are always lonely and mostly do not have long term satisfying relationships. She probably also fears the oppression of her daughter, a reality that can be blown up out of proportion by ignorance. These myths can tend to keep a mother stuck, unable to be open to the message her daughter is conveying by coming out. Quote, "This is an important aspect of my life, which I am entrusting to you, and you mean enough to me that I want to risk this sharing." End quote. People tend to assume, when there is no contrary evidence, that everyone they know is heterosexual. Adrian Rich terms this the quote unquote heterosexual assumption. While spouses or dates are often invited to work related functions, it may be inappropriate or actually dangerous to bring along a lesbian lover, and women who attend a function alone are assumed to be single and heterosexual. In order to be recognized as a lesbian, it is necessary to announce this fact, which is somehow perceived as quote unquote flaunting one's lesbianism or quote making a big deal end quote of it. Thus, there is little opportunity for validation of a lesbian relationship. Colleagues and other associates often provide scant information, even those who may know about one's sexual orientation. Some treatment considerations. Sometimes, a disclosure of lesbianism to a mother can carry with it unconscious expectations of some amount of validation. Total rejection can be devastating. So often, a lesbian has internalized societal homophobia as self hatred, and any negative reaction from a mother can intensify the self deprecation already present. It may be necessary to work through many self esteem issues before a client can even make an informed choice about whether or not telling her mother is best for her unique situation. Work with clients can focus on the prerequisites of feeling ready to quote unquote come out to mom, as well as exploring whether the motivation for coming out stems from their own inner readiness or from community pressure to do so. What would be the benefits and the liabilities of coming out to this particular point in each of their lives? At what point does a client feel that if her mother rejects her, she will be strong enough to handle that rejection? What past experiences in her relationship with her mother may give her a clue to a likely range of initial reactions from her mother? Is she in a position to get community support to help her mother work through her negative reactions and homophobia and to work on nurturing an open communication process between them? At what point in the process might her mother be helped by concrete information, a book, a parents group? It is important for therapists to recognize that coming out is a complex and difficult process and not one which should be pushed upon a client. It is far from the best course of action for every lesbian to take. Honesty between mother and daughter, at the cost of an estrangement, is not always the best decision. Potential gains may not be worth risking possible losses in a relationship with an elderly parent, or one who lives halfway around the globe and is rarely seen. However, some lesbians have found that disclosure of this important part of their identity has meant a great deal of sick has meant a great deal to sick or dying parent. It is important to explore whether hesitancy is because of the mother's or the daughter's internalized homophobia, both of which can be valid reasons for rejecting or postponing a decision to come out. A therapist can help a lesbian client explore a range of possible consequences within their particular family. This will help assess whether coming out is a healthy option for each client, and if so, to figure out appropriate timing for her personal and familial evolution. Because adults can easily slip back into children's roles with their parents, particularly around emotionally charged topics, it is especially hard to be rational and calm when coming out to one's mother for the first time. Often, clients report that the discussion felt out of control and that both parties said things they didn't mean. The pattern mothers and daughters often exhibit following a disclosure is one where each feels the other is not listening to her and is consequently unable to listen in return. At a time when communication is desperately needed, it seems to be closed off beyond repair. Such a cycle can escalate without either participant wanting it to, but with each feeling powerless to stop the relationship from deteriorating further. Anticipating what may happen as a result of coming out can help clients to cope better with the reverberations. One may help a client anticipate possible scenarios. One way to help a client anticipate possible scenarios is to use role plays or guided fantasies in group or individual therapy sessions before an initial disclosure to parents. Some have found it easier to quote unquote practice by coming out first to a sibling who is likely to be accepting. If disclosure goes well, this new ally can then lend support and help strategize around dealing with mother. If the event does not go well, the lesbian client will have a chance to review what happened in therapy and work on possible adaptations in her own responses to the situation. Thus, options are broadened to help a client disclose her lesbianism to parents in a healthy, mutually affirming way. It can be useful for a therapist to view the coming out process as a reworking of earlier separations from the mother as an adolescent and other developmental milestones of adult life. As with other separations, clients may feel both positively and negatively towards the prospect of greater differentiation. Therapists can work with both sides of this ambivalence to help lesbian clients work through and feel comfortable with both the repetitive and the new aspects of this experience of separation. Often, disclosure can be followed by parental hopes for a quote unquote cure and well meaning offers to pay for therapy. A daughter who is unsure of her lesbianism and looking for external validation may feel her anxieties and ambivalences raised by this reaction. One who is sure of her lesbianism may become enraged at a mother's suggestion of a quote unquote cure, and the event of disclosure can end in a full scale conflict that closes off communication for a time. Therapists may encounter more than one client in a first session who is unsure of whether she is entering therapy for herself or for her mother. As with other issues, it is vital to let the client know that whatever decision she makes around her sexual orientation is acceptable to the therapist. This will help the client to sort out her own wishes and fears more realistically, rather than simply working to please her mother or her therapist. Working with a client who is already enraged at her mother necessitates a similarly balanced approach. Empathetic connections with such a client will eventually allow her to feel greater ambivalence toward her mother and more empathy with her mother's feelings. Because of the shifts that occur in a family system following any major change, it can be useful for a therapist to help a lesbian client anticipate some of what could happen in her family if she decides to come out to her mother. It is important to help a client evaluate the quality of the boundary between parent and adult child before a disclosure decision. Are mother and daughter enmeshed? Disengaged? What is the lesbian's role in the family now, and how might that change if she were to come out? A lesbian who has played a role of the quote unquote good child, counterbalanced by a quote unquote bad child elsewhere in the family, should explore how it would feel to switch roles suddenly and feel like the scapegoat. In some existential sense, such a shift still leaves the lesbian in the role of a quote unquote good daughter, as she has helped to improve the relationship between mother and former scapegoat. This approach may be useful for a therapist as a reframing technique, a way to see a negatively perceived situation in a positive context. Although frequently a disclosure to family results in rejection or lessening of contact, there are some instances when a mother who has trouble with her daughter's lesbianism escalates contact following disclosure. This can be the reaction of a mother who is afraid for her daughter and who hopes to maintain some enmeshment as a way of maintaining control. The fear for her daughter's welfare, which may be partially a fear of losing her daughter to another woman, may justify frequent questioning and contact. This situation annoying as it may be to a lesbian daughter, can also be viewed as part of a positive process in which a therapist can help. Mother's love and caring can be acknowledged and affirmed, while at the same time, a daughter can be helped to state firm limits regarding her independence and frequency of contact. Helping a lesbian client understand the mourning process can lead to greater empathy for both her mother and herself, because a lesbian needs to mourn the loss of her heterosexual privilege as well. Although the cognitive understanding that the grief process includes denial and anger may not make acceptance of those feelings from one's mother any easier, it can help a lesbian to stay open to different feelings throughout the passage of time. For a differently abled woman, sorry, for differently abled women, their mother's mourning of their lesbianism may be made more complex by their never having successfully completed grief work around that what society views as a handicap. However, the second time round, the differently abled lesbian has a unique opportunity not available if her mother was mourning a congenital factor. As an infant, she was unable to help her mother deal with her deafness or blindness. In fact, she was unaware of it herself. If she is self accepting as an adult, a differently abled lesbian can offer her mother support and encouragement to deal with the realities of her identity that mother has internalized as quote unquote bad. She may be able to share some of her own grief or disappointment with her mother, not as a way to say that she wishes she were different, but in order to help her mother experience the range of feelings necessary to successfully work through the grieving process. Whether a mother is invited into therapy or client talks with her mother outside of the therapeutic situation, such a process allows the opportunity for both mother and lesbian daughter to handle both griefs as a new development level. Societal homophobia is internalized by all of us to greater or lesser degrees. However, a lesbian who is in contact with other lesbians in a community has the opportunity to test out and reject many myths in which she has grown up. In all likelihood, her mother has not had similar opportunities. If her mother can discuss some of her fears, her daughter can use the opportunity to help clarify some myths and to reaffirm the love between them. It can help to remember that the mother who appears distant and rejecting might really be saying, quote, I care a lot about you and I'm scared for you. End quote. The mother of a lesbian must contend with a strong societal belief that her child rearing must have been insufficient for this to have happened. Her own guilt and shame influences not only how she reacts to others in the family, but also how a lesbian daughter and her mother feel about themselves and each other. Exploring this issue in therapy can give the lesbian client an important perspective on her own and her mother's coming out processes. Crossing cultural barriers is always difficult, and a straight therapist working with a lesbian client is no exception. It is important for a straight therapist to be well informed, to be honest with lesbian clients about her own prejudices, and to obtain supervision from a lesbian therapist if possible. White lesbian therapists are often in a position of treating lesbians of color across a different cultural barrier. Therapy with a minority lesbian is more complex in many ways, and it is essential for a therapist to understand the structure of a minority client's family and culture, whether she is white or from a different minority group. Again, it is vital to be open about one's own biases and limitations, and to be supervised by a therapist from the client's own ethnic group when possible. Therapists can help their lesbian clients, both before and during the coming out process, to think about their own level of self esteem, of preparation for mother, so rejection will not feel devastating, and about mother's own process of acceptance. The initial disclosure is indeed an event but it is also the beginning of a process. To be cognizant of when both mother and daughter are in this process can, at best, help them undergo a period of healing to create a different relationship. If healing is not possible between them, then the coming out process can, at least, result in a feeling of empowerment and wholeness for a lesbian daughter. Discussion. Coming out is a choice. A lesbian can choose not to share this aspect of her life with her mother. A mother can choose not to quote unquote come out to hide her daughter's lesbianism from family and neighbors. A bisexual woman can decide to tell her mother about her male lovers and not her female lovers. Coming out to mother as bisexual may strengthen her mother's wish, often hoped for with lesbians as well, that she will eventually quote unquote find the right man. Lesbians who are able to pass as heterosexual and who decide not to come out to their mothers, or who came out to their mothers but whose mothers then keep it a secret, can reap the rewards of being viewed as quote unquote normal, as well as the problems of living a lie. For a lesbian who is quote unquote too butch to pass, a mother often knows at a pre-conscious level that her daughter is a lesbian. Thus, a mother's level of denial can be quite strong before the coming out process begins. This may make the process more difficult, or it may make it easier. Coming out to one's mother is both a behavioral and a self definitional process on many levels. Intra-psychically, coming out is an alteration of the usual pattern of replacing father with husband in the bisexual triangle. It is a rejection of the frustrations of heterosexual asymmetry. It is an affirmation of womanhood and, in its courageous honesty, an affirmation of oneself. For a mother, a daughter's coming out may revive her own early same sex attraction. It may feel like abandonment, rejection, sexual intrusion, or affirmation and validation. It may precipitate a mourning process for the wished for heterosexual daughter, and it may include altruistic satisfaction that her daughter has the opportunity for sexual and emotional reciprocity. From a family system perspective, coming out often creates a clearer boundary between a mother and daughter, can reinforce or change coalitions or scapegoating, and can challenge a family style. Socioculturally, the coming out process rejects cultural norms, proclaims a woman's sexuality, and challenges the heterosexual assumption. As we understand more about the options in the coming out process for both lesbians and their mothers, we increase the options of creating adult, differentiated mother daughter relationships. Coming out to one's mother as an appropriate and well informed decision can be a vital life altering developmental task for lesbian adolescence or adulthood.